Wow, welcome everyone. I can't believe all of the places that people are calling in from. This is amazing. I actually see New York, Chicago, California. I even saw Bermuda. This is so amazing. I am so excited to have you here today in this virtual environment. Thank you for joining us. I am so excited about what we have to discuss today. And before we get started, I just want to make sure I hope you and your families are doing well, or as well as can be expected during this crazy time. I am so excited to get this conversation started and host today's Diverse by Design, the 140,000 women in the pandemic. My name is Michelle Pullaro, and I have the privilege to serve as the Chief Administrative Officer of Per Scholas. And for those of you that are not familiar with Per Scholas, we're a national organization that has been advancing economic mobility for over 25 years. Through rigorous tech training, professional development, and employer connections, we prepare individuals who are traditionally underrepresented in the tech field for high growth careers. We partner with employers to build diverse talent pools, connecting our graduates to careers in tech. With 17 campuses across the country and growing, we've trained 13,000 women and men in careers in tech. And one thing that drives us towards this work, and a shared belief that we all have, our employer partners, our staff, all of you, is that talent is ubiquitous. Opportunity is not. And that's why we launched Diverse by Design in 2016. We wanted to bring employers together to have courageous conversations, to discuss some of the challenges they were facing with diversity, equity, and inclusion in their workforce. And that brings us to today. The theme of today's conversation, which is the 140K, the impact that the pandemic has had in women in the workplace. 140,000 is what represents all jobs that were lost in December of 2020. And the thing that's amazing about that statistic is that was all by women in a year that was the worst year since the Great Depression on our economic environment. What's even more sobering is that we lost 5.4 million jobs. Women lost 5.4 million jobs compared to men who lost 4.4 million. In total, devastating to the economy. But it's something we need to accept. There's 1 million less women in the workplace today. And unless we are intentional and work together to find solutions, we're going to pass up all the progress that we've made, breaking glass ceilings, striving for more. And we together can make a difference. And just last month, there was a statistic that stopped me in my tracks, that the labor participation rate in the United States for women is the lowest it's been in 34 years. 34 years. That made me reflect of where I was 34 years ago. I was a teenager, and I had witnessed my mother facing tons of discrimination in the workplace because she was a woman. Her goal was to have a job in business, and a career in business. And she faced decades of discrimination along the way. It started when she was in college. She was told by her professors to not even bother raising her hand, because he remarked she was just gonna stay home, raise a family, get married, and not use any of the knowledge. Although she was discouraged, she kept fighting. And with a college degree in hand, she joined a financial services firm. And at that financial services firm, her boss kept giving her different assignments than her male counterparts. And she fought to get those same assignments. And of course, she prevailed and did incredibly well in her career. But then when she had her sights set on launching her own business, she faced another barrier. She went to get a business loan, and even though she had assets in her name, she was turned down because she was a woman. She has fought undeterred for decades for this career. And eventually she launched her own firm and gained the financial and professional independence that she had longed for her entire life. And I know that she did that because she's a strong woman. And I am a strong woman because of her. And it's because of the strength and determination that I know everybody on this call is going to have an impact on our shared future. Even though the pandemic has erased decades of work that we've done, if we band together and continue to fight like my mother did, we can make up for that lost time. I hope you will fight. I know I will. And today we have the opportunity to hear from 3 trailblazing women in corporate America who are leading the charge. The dynamic leaders will share their personal experiences as well as what their companies are doing to support women during this pandemic. But first, before that conversation, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce a very special guest, someone who I'm honored to call my colleague, Toni Cunningham. Toni serves as Per Scholas' managing director of our Columbus, Ohio campus. And today, Toni will provide highlights from McKinsey and Lean In's Women in the Workplace 2020 study. Toni, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle. And thank you for telling us the story about your mother. That was awesome and amazing. And it just brings home all of the conversation that we'll have today and the importance of ensuring that we are intentionally focused on this issue and bringing our women back into the workplace. So we're going to start off with a presentation. I'm going to just hit the highlights of the McKinsey report. You should definitely go and look it up and read the full report, as there's a lot of information in there that will give you insight as well as possibly spur some sort of inspiration or recommendations of things that we can do to be intentional about supporting our women returning to the workforce. So, women in the workplace. At the beginning of 2020, before the COVID-19 pandemic began, the United States, the representation of women in the United States, the representation of women was slowly trending in the right direction. So we were moving forward with having more women in corporate America. This was most pronounced in senior management. Between 2015 and 2020, the share of women grew from 23 to 28% in senior vice president roles. That's awesome, 23 to 28%, and from 17 to 21% in the C-suite. Women remain dramatically underrepresented, particularly women of color, but the numbers were at least, they were improving. Due to challenges created by COVID-19, as many as 2 million women are considering taking a leave of absence or leaving the workforce altogether. And this was at the time of this report in 2020, so who knows what has happened since. This is the first time we've seen signs of women leaving the workforce at higher rates than men. In the previous 5 years of this study, women and men left their companies kind of at similar rates. If these women feel forced to leave the workforce, we'll end up with far fewer women in leadership. And I want us to think about that as we move forward in the conversation today. We'll end up with far fewer women in leadership and far fewer women on track to be future leaders. All the progress we've seen over the past 5 years will be erased. So some of the challenges loom larger for certain groups of women. Compared with women overall, Latinas are more likely to worry about layoffs and furloughs. And LGBTQ plus women are almost twice as likely as employees overall to cite mental health challenges as one of their biggest challenges for COVID-19. So when you look at this slide, you'll see some of the challenges that women face or are dealing with: anxiety, burnout, mental health challenges, childcare and homeschooling responsibilities, physical and mental health of loved ones. You know, we're the caretakers, so we're taking care of everyone. And then, of course, there's the financial insecurity. Next. The pressures of the pandemic are driving some employees, especially women, to consider downshifting their careers or leaving the workforce altogether. The following factors are predictive of whether an employee considers downshifting or leaving. So you can see all of these things that swirl in our head when we're thinking about what to do with what we're faced with. Lack of flexibility at work. Some roles you just can't be flexible, some they won't. Feeling like they need to be available to work at all hours, always on. How many of us know about that? Housework and caregiving burdens due to COVID-19. Worry that their performance will be negatively judged because of the caregiving responsibilities that you have during the pandemic. Discomfort with sharing the challenges that you're facing. Who wants to talk about it and be the person to always raise the issues around the challenges you're having? Feeling blindsided by decisions that affect your day to day because communication is challenged, or feeling just unable to bring your whole self to work. We all struggle with those types of things. Although these factors hurt all employees, some women experience certain challenges at higher rates. For example, mothers are more likely than fathers to worry about their performance being negatively judged due to their caregiving responsibilities. And women in senior leadership are more likely than men at the same level to feel like they have to be always on. And then Black women are more likely than women and men overall to feel like we just cannot bring our whole selves to work. So when you think about some challenges that we face, less than a third of the companies have adjusted their performance review criteria to account for these challenges, especially the ones in the pandemic. And only about half have updated their employee plans or performance reviews to make sure that their expectations around productivity have shifted based on the challenges. That means that many employees, especially those who are parents and caregivers, are facing a choice between appearing to fall short of pre-pandemic expectations that may now be unrealistic, or just trying to push yourself and push through to meet these unsustainable activities and the pace that it would take to achieve them. 76% of mothers with children under the age of 10 say childcare is one of their top challenges during COVID-19, compared to 54% of the fathers of young children. I can't imagine trying to get this all done at the same dining room table, but many of you do it every day. The quote here that we just saw was from an Asian mom who talked about the assumption that a lot of families that are in the work as and primary caregivers, their kids literally walk past the dads and ask for stuff. So mom is always the person that's going to take care of it, right? So the pandemic has highlighted how disproportionately things do fall on women because it's always mom. Mom is always going to take care of you. So that's something to think about when we think about what all we're facing in this pandemic. Women are 1.5 times more likely than fathers to be spending an extra 3 or more hours a day on housework and childcare, excuse me. That is really startling to me when you think about quantifying the hours. Sometimes we just do our work and we don't think about it, but it's really the equivalent of a part-time job, 20 hours a week to the extra outside of what we do in our work. Meanwhile, for the 1 in 5 mothers who don't live with a spouse or partner, those challenges are even greater. So our single mothers are much more likely to do everything and have to care for everything and have to take care of everything. And then there's the whole financial insecurity of, I cannot lose my job or downgrade my job because my job is holding us all together. Latina and Black mothers are shouldering a lot of the heavier burden than white mothers. It's just a fact. They are more likely to be their family's sole breadwinner or to have partners working outside of the home during COVID-19. And they're doing more at home to make up for mom and dad being gone. Latina mothers are 1.6 times more likely than white mothers to be responsible for all of the childcare and housework. And Black mothers are twice as likely to be handling all of it, everything. I had one of those mothers as I grew up in a household with a single mom who worked and tried to further her education with a young child at home. It's a lot. Mothers also face persistent bias in the workplace. There's a false perception that mothers can't be truly invested in both family and work and are therefore less committed than the fathers are. And especially women without children as well. People assume that because women don't have children, that they're way more committed than women who do. And when mothers take advantage of flexible work options, that perception is strengthened. So if you take advantage of the flexibility of coming in late, leaving a little earlier so that you can get home and get some things set, then that's kind of looked at negatively. Now that family demands are front and center, and sometimes they're literally visible, like you being on a webinar and supporting the kids and making sure everybody's good and taking care of an aging parent, those biases can be intensified. And we've all seen it, right? So when you think about how, given the enormous challenges that mothers are facing at work and at home, two things should come as no surprise. Many mothers are considering downshifting their career or leaving the workforce. And two, they're more significantly likely to be thinking about taking these steps than fathers are. So if there's a decision at the table, it's usually the mom who has to step away from her job if it's a two-parent household. Not surprisingly, senior level women are significantly more than men at the same level feel under pressure to get the job done, be available all of the time so that you don't appear to be slacking in any way in handling your responsibility. These women are 1.5 times more likely than senior level men to think about downshifting their careers or leaving the workforce because of COVID-19. Almost 3 in 4 cite burnout as the main reason. And sometimes we can be experiencing burnout and not even realize that that's what's actually happening with us. Black women are disproportionately impacted by the difficult events of 2020. They are more than twice as likely as women overall to say that the death of a loved one has been one of their biggest challenges during the COVID-19 pandemic. You know, personally, I am taking care of my mom, and I can't imagine with what we're doing now if something were, heaven forbid, to actually happen, and you've got to hold it all together and try not to fall apart while you need to go through this grief process and everything else. And then do it alone as a single woman. Incidents of racial violence across the US are exacting a really heavy toll. We have to think about things and we have to consider what's happening in our community around us while we're trying to make sure that we manage work and everything else and not lose ground in any one of those areas. Black women are almost twice as likely as women overall to say that they can't bring their whole selves to work, and more than 1.5 times as likely to say they don't have strong allies. So sometimes when you just want to unpack something, work is a lonely place because you don't feel like you can let that show in the workplace. Across all of the data about how employees are faring during the COVID-19 crisis, two trends stand out. First, women are having a worse experience than men. And second, women aren't all having identical experiences. So we can't lump everyone together. Black women, Latina women, Asian women, LGBTQ plus women, and women with disabilities are facing distinct challenges. It is important for companies to understand this so that they can address those challenges directly. It is not a one size fits all by any means. So in conclusion, this is a pivotal moment. Companies have shown a growing commitment to gender diversity since the first year of the study that McKinsey started in 2015. That commitment is more important than ever right now. If companies rise to this moment with bold action, they can protect hard-won gains in gender diversity and lay the foundation for a better workplace long after COVID-19 is behind us. We just have to be intentional. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share this highlight of the McKinsey report. Again, I encourage everyone to go back in and read the full report. to gather all of the information, and then let's make a plan. Michelle, I'm going to turn it back over to you for you to set us up for this amazing, amazing discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Toni. Thank you for underscoring how this is such a pivotal moment for all of us. Now it is my pleasure to welcome our three panelists, diverse, impactful women from corporate America who will give firsthand perspectives. You can read their full bios by visiting our website at diversebydesign.org/women. But first, I'd like to welcome Stephanie LeBlanc-Godfrey to our virtual stage. Stephanie serves as the Global Head of Community Inclusion Programs for Women of Color at Google and is the founder of Parenting Backwards. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you, Michelle.
Sorry. Our next guest is Julie Dillman, SVP of Chubb Group and Global Head of Operations. Welcome, Julie. And rounding out our fireside chat is Kimberly Jones, who serves as Managing Director of People Experience and Markets of Expertise Leader at PwC. Stephanie, as I get ready to pass it over to you, I'd like to remind our guests to submit questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of the Zoom. We'll take a few minutes at the end to answer some live questions. Stephanie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michelle. So good to see you again. And thank you to everyone who has joined. And special thanks to my fellow guests, Julie and Kimberly. So let's get started. So Julie, Kim, and I, of course, connected before this event. And each of us bring a really unique and nuanced perspective to this conversation. We are all women being impacted by the pandemic, and we're also executives at the forefront of minimizing what that impact looks like for people that look like us. So I'd love to start off with each of you. How has the pandemic impacted you both as a woman and as an executive?
Well, maybe I'll start, Stephanie. And what I'd like to say is personally, my own adjustment to the pandemic and the new way of working took some time to find a rhythm. So as I think about those who I lead, it was an adjustment for me as well. run a global organization, and in 2019 spent 2/3 of the workdays on the road. So all of a sudden being plopped in my home with my family was an adjustment for all of us. And then sort of finding that rhythm that I think we've all had to find for self-care. You know, if we use exercise as our outlet, how do we get to the gym when it's closed? How are we going to find that routine for self-care so we can be effective as home leaders and home with caring for our families as we all do, and then also effective at work. That, you know, it really helped me think about new ways that I needed to stay engaged and attuned across my organization as well as my family. Professionally, I had accountability for getting our workforce home and working productively, securing our technology environment, and ensuring that we had ability to work productively and in an engaged way. I think on the positive side, if we can find any positives in this whole situation, it really has helped us as leaders, you know, find some new ways to innovate and opportunities to flex some new muscles as we lead through this very, you know, through the situation that's lasted way more, you know, longer than any of us ever anticipated.
Okay.
Yes, you know, I think 6 months or a year from now, I might look back on this time and see even more ways that I was impacted by the pandemic. You know, there's some things that I recognize now, and I think some things that I'll recognize even more so later. I think overall for me, similar to Julie, in my regular day-to-day work life, I was on a plane quite a bit, and I was traveling here, there, and everywhere, and had very much gotten accustomed to that pace. And, you know, just like for everyone else, the adjustment was almost overnight to all of a sudden not doing that. A little bit different from Julie, I have one daughter, and she's 20 years old now, and she's off in school in New York at NYU. I live in Dallas. So I'm an empty nester. It's just me and my alpha female German Shepherd Scout dog. So it's just us here. And so it's been quite an adjustment, again, almost overnight. I realized a lot of my social interaction came from the meetings that I was in and the traveling that I did. So been having to adjust to that. I think overall, it's given me more quiet time, because with all of that travel, and then even outside of the travel, the social types of activities that I was doing here where I live, that all of a sudden I wasn't doing, it's caused me to be still more often than I ever was before, and do a lot of reflection on life and what's important and gaining perspective. And with that has also come some unexpected gifts. And I'll just tell you about a couple of those so you see what I mean. And they both happen to revolve around my daughter, who I love to talk about. But even in spending time with her, so NYU, almost, you know, like so many other things, shut down overnight. All of a sudden it was all online classes. And in the earliest days of what was going on, you know, there wasn't a lot of travel, certainly, that me and my family were doing. And so we actually made a road trip from Texas to New York to get her and bring her home. And it was really interesting in that, you know, a road trip, 10 plus hours in a car, right? If you can imagine that with two people, you have periods of time where you're talking a lot, and periods of time where you're listening to music, and periods of time where you're debating whose music to listen to, you know, and then periods of time where you're just quiet. And it was in one of those quiet moments that my daughter said to me, she said, you know, Mom, she said, it is not the most fun thing in the world to drive halfway across country for hours and hours and hours. She said, but at the same time, it's pretty cool that we get to just spend all this time together in the same place without a lot of distraction, just to hang out together. And it was one of those moments, you know, that as a mom brought tears to my eyes, because it was such a profound yet simple observation that I really appreciated. And then even in addition to that, having her here with me for it was about 3 months, without our usual, her being with her friends, me doing things with my friends, you know, all kinds of different things going on. We were here at home together. It was during this time period through last summer, like a year ago, March through the summer. And I realized what a gift it was for me to be able to process so many big things that were happening in our society, not only with the pandemic and everything that brought, but clearly around this time last year, you know, we had the George Floyd murder and everything that happened after that with the unrest in our country and around the world. And I would just describe it as a very special moment to be here with my daughter, where we could process together and be able to talk about these things together, and even help each other understand in some ways what was going on and how it impacted us. So, you know, without the pandemic, not that I would ever wish a pandemic on anyone, but it did have some special gifts for me personally. So that was from a personal perspective. I would say from a work perspective, as a leader at PwC, it was interesting in that I've always said my purpose, my mission in my job is to make all of our PwCer lives as good as they can be while they are at work. I mean, that is my job. It is the people experience. And so I want to make everyone's experience the best that it can be. Well, now all of a sudden, it was almost like my mission was on steroids, because not only was it that in the day-to-day sense, but there was like an existential layer put on top of it, right? I mean, we were all, and still are in many cases, very concerned about our own health, the health of our families, our own well-being, the well-being of our families. And so I was just grateful to be in a position where I could influence things that we were doing at PwC to try to help people, not only with their work life, but their overall lives, to try to give some support and some comfort where we could. It was nice to have that seat at the table in a very loud voice. able to influence what we did to support our folks, and then to see behind the scenes our own leaders at PwC and how they reacted to the challenges that were before us. It was almost this time last year that our senior partner, Tim Ryan, put out an article and a blog post that talked about layoffs being a last resort for those of us here at PwC. And I'll never forget what a relief that was, even just for me, being among the executive leaders here, because that was at a point in time where we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know if our business was all of a sudden going to go belly up, if we were going to have layoffs. It was a big concern of a lot of people. And so it was really nice to sort of be on the inside of some of those decisions and some of those communications and see the positive impact that it had on all of our folks at PwC.
Love that. Thank you both for sharing. And I'll jump in, right? So quite candidly, I am struggling and thriving at the same time, right? Duality is a thing. I am proof positive of that, where depending on the moment of the day, I either feel like I am drowning in all of it, or I feel like I got this together, pandemic or not, I'm here. And so what I've been personally working on is just what I call this space of grace from both a work and a personal perspective, right? So when I'm excelling at home, I for sure am dropping some balls at work, and vice versa. When things are going extremely well at work, answering all the emails, hitting all the deadlines, all the meetings, all of those things, my kids are like, can I see my mommy, please? And so both my husband and kids and my tribe, as well as my leadership team, have really been great in affirming me in these moments so that I can just breathe, reset, and then just move forward and start again. And that happens, like I said, multiple times throughout the day. And that's okay, because that's just where we are. And then from an executive perspective, my role is literally in service of women, parents, and caregivers. I fit into those communities. And so for me, I can't help but go hard, right? I live and breathe their experiences. I stay closely connected to these communities. And so I hear firsthand the challenges that they're having and the dynamics that they're going through. And so that oftentimes means that I am doing more in a day than I should in terms of self-care, taking a back seat, candidly, sometimes even my family taking a back seat, because I'm just thinking of the thousands of women that need that listening ear and that support, and me working with my colleagues on outcomes that will help them to succeed. And so there's always this back and forth of, who's the glass ball and who's the rubber ball for the day to get things done and make sure I don't get lost in it and my family doesn't get lost in it either. Julie, you had a question for us.
I do, Stephanie. And before I sort of ask you my question, I just want to tell you the space of grace, that is now a term in my, roster of isms. That is such a spectacular way to think about how you balance all of those balls. So thank you for sharing that. We heard some really startling numbers regarding the number of women exiting the workforce as a result of COVID-19. How is that playing out real time in your organization? And maybe we'll start with you, Stephanie, in terms of how you're seeing that play out at Google.
Sure. So it's a daily conversation, especially again within the work that I do in support of women, parents, and caregivers, right? A lot of us are part of this sandwich generation where we're taking care of both kids and parents. Many of us are trying to process the pandemic while we still have business as usual goals and deadlines that have not slow down, even though we are in the midst of a pandemic. And so, my team and I, we are just feverishly working on how to manage all of those things and meet what a lot of women want and what I hear every day, right? Which is they want to work. They enjoy the work that they do. And so they don't want to leave the workforce. Many even, don't want to take carer's leave, which is something that a lot of companies, including mine, offer, which is a tremendous help. But we're like, how can we work and have all the resources that literally shut off in one day, and 365 days and counting, we haven't been able to get those resources back, whether it's in terms of just care for our kids or our families, being able to step out, having those social outlets. And so we're working on how to address those challenges and really focus in on how women can stay in the workforce and have that space to do the work that they love, and have the resources that they need to do that.
Kim, do you have any thoughts that you
Yeah, I'll add in from our PwC perspective. And for those of you who aren't as familiar with PwC, we're a large financial services organization. We do work in the tax area, consulting, auditing areas. And so we're more of a knowledge-based organization versus needing to be on site and producing a product, for example. So in some respects, how it's affected our day-to-day has maybe not been as drastic as for other employees at other types of companies, say the travel industry or hospitality. We haven't been impacted quite as much in that regard. So for us, the big challenge has been in continuing to stay on top of the evolving needs of our workforce. So what I mean by that is, the first big challenge was sort of getting everybody over the hump to realize what was happening, to let it sink in, to sort of get over the shock of everything that was happening about a year ago. We had to physically close some of our offices and getting our people through that process. Then the next big challenge seemed to be all of a sudden schools were closed, and with a workforce of average age in the high 20s, low 30s, we have an awful lot of parents with young children, and all of a sudden they were trying to not only become accustomed to what was going on with the pandemic, care for potentially ill family members or even themselves, but they also had their kids at home trying to homeschool while also at the same time trying to do a very demanding job for PwC. So that was sort of our next batch of issues that we dealt with. And then as time went on, there were other things. There was mental health, well-being types of things. So for us, it's been what I like to think of as a work in progress. As soon as you check the box of having to sort of resolve the acute needs in one area, all of a sudden there was kind of another one popping up. And we've been fortunate, and I'm going to knock on wood as I say this in order not to jinx us, but so far we haven't had a significant number of women leave PwC so far. And I think that's because we've doubled down on some of the things that were already in place at PwC in terms of flexibility, flexible work arrangements. We've introduced this concept of protected time. So if you have your children at home from school, just as an example, and you need to take 2 hours middle of the day to just make them lunch, get them settled, get them set up for their Zoom classes for the afternoon, whatever the case may be, we have protected time that everybody at PwC recognizes, understands, no questions asked. If you're out from 11 to 1 or whatever time block it is, you've got that. So we've done some things to make it a little bit easier, even though it is still very challenging for our women, for our working moms, for parents, for caregivers, for everybody. We're all dealing with certain types of challenges here. So that's kind of how we've seen it here.
I love that idea of protected time. We're doing something similar, but that's like a good name for it. Where like I'm based in New Jersey, but I work West Coast hours. And so I have that morning time to kind of help my kids through virtual school. And it's like no questions asked, everyone gets it, and kind of respects those block out periods during the day, right?
That's right.
Yeah. I think it's great. It's another term we can all take back to, sort of describe what we're doing. I think, there's no doubt that COVID-19 has presented all companies and their talent with new challenges. Similar to Kim, we haven't experienced a dramatic departure of our women colleagues, but we aren't complacent either to the point of the flexibility and the requirements that are needed for us to manage both ends of the spectrum. I think modeling the way as leaders, as I sit in an organization where I have global responsibility for a very large organization, I try to model the way as much as I can that it's okay to step away from the screen time and to do that on your own terms. I actually have grown children and I have little grandchildren, and I have one who schools here on Fridays. So her parents can have a bit of a break as they're both trying to work demanding jobs from home. And I've made it a point to let my staff and others see that, Dear Meta is schooling behind me in my office, because one, it's very nourishing for me from my own mental health perspective, but also I think it's helpful for the organization to say it's okay. We all are attending to family in whatever way we need to do that. So thank you for sharing those perspectives. Kim, I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, I guess so. I mentioned protected time that we talk about here at PwC, and we've had a few what I would call maybe creative approaches to try to help with the challenge that everyone has been facing. So there's protected time. We also started what some commonly call a sabbatical. It's a leave of absence program whereby up to 6 months, a person can be on a leave of absence, not working at all, but still getting 20% of their pay. So that's kind of another creative thing that we did here at PwC for this pandemic time period. In some ways, it's been not so much about creativity as it has been really leaning into and leveraging some of the benefits that we already had around flexibility. So I mentioned the flexible work arrangements, the reduced work schedules, job sharing, compressed work weeks. We sort of brought those back out, polished them up, and put a big spotlight on them, because what we were finding is, whereas we had always had a certain number of people participate in these types of programs, all of a sudden there were a whole lot more people for whom these programs could be relevant and for whom they could be helpful. So we sort of re-educated our workforce on what some of these flexible options were and supported them in finding out which of the ones might be most beneficial to them. So in some ways it wasn't about, a shiny new thing as much as it was about leveraging things that had been in existence sort of in new ways. So I'm curious about both of your organizations, Stephanie and Julie, what types of things have you put in place to sort of support your folks? And Julie, maybe I'll start with you this time.
Sure. We have a program that's called Taking Care. And it is sort of dimensioned into 3 towers: taking care of you, taking care of others, and taking care of business. And what we do with that program, whether it's virtual resources, links on our website, forums that we have, speakers that we bring in, we're trying to focus on, the well-being of our employee and what they need and what are the resources that they need and how do we better, attend to them, but also recognizing that they're all taking care of others. So what are the resources they need and how can we help them take care of others? And then taking care of business, which is much more helping managers lead and motivate their organizations from a virtual place. We're all learning new skills. We're learning to recognize, visual cues through video, which, our EQ is now becoming sort of virtualized as we try to, understand, are people not as engaged? Are they engaged? How are they feeling? Asking more outwardly, how to train our managers to ask more, feeling questions around how people are doing in empathetic listening. And then encouraging the engagement. We do require that all of our leaders stand up with their teams, all of their teams together at least once a week. My colleagues and our CEO, we stand up together every morning virtually, but it's not so much about what the business is that we conduct in that 15 to 30 minutes, but that it's that we engage with each other in a sort of human interaction. We've also, the other thing that we've done is really tried to leverage what we call our business roundtables. That's our various sponsored groups for different, you know, our women, our people of color, our business roundtable groups, and leverage them, as you both pointed out, to address the specific needs of those various groups and to have a forum to engage with each other where they can sort of utilize each other from a network perspective to address some of those things. So, you know, that's sort of how we're approaching it, and, you know, learning as we go.
How about you?
Yeah, so sure. So for me, the work that we've been doing in support of women, you know, in terms of professional enrichment and community building has been at the top of our agenda even prior to COVID, right? And so now it's become even more of a focal point. And it's been so in a couple of ways. So one is focusing on, you know, proactive information sharing in regards to policies and programs that are in service of women, parents, and caregivers, so that when they are in a moment of crisis, that they know where to go and who to talk to get them the information that they need in that, to support them in that moment. Second is around investing in management and manager and leadership competencies, right? That's the critical piece that I always speak about. One, we need leaders to model how they are taking protected time, how they are doing self-care, how they are ruthlessly prioritizing priorities for their group so that their team feels empowered to follow suit and do things that are best for them personally, and also for the business. And then the second is around making sure that women have a psychologically safe space for them to have these honest and open conversations with their managers without fear of retaliation or impact to their career trajectory, so that we are not suffering in silence because we're afraid to say that we need, you know, time off or a different schedule or flexible time because of the fears that I just mentioned. So making sure that we give competencies to those managers to be able to meet women where they are, be proactive about starting these conversations, and then understanding how to support them either ramp up or ramp down from these different types of leaves that they can take without skipping a beat for when they return to kind of continue on their career trajectory. And then finally, it's around creating spaces for women to connect with other women, right, based on those shared identities. We may be physically isolated, but it doesn't mean that we have to navigate the pandemic and the challenges and, you know, all of the things kind of running through our head alone. We can be in this together. And so creating spaces for those types of connections that look a little bit differently than if we were in the office and could meet in the kitchen, to have that virtual kitchen space and create that space for women to connect. I know for me personally, has really, really been impactful to have a group chat, a group text, a standing meeting of other moms or other just folks that we can kind of talk through how we're managing, give each other that I see you, I hear you, that validation of what they're experiencing, and then talk through ways in which you can thrive and continue to navigate the times that we're in.
That sense of community is so important. I'm glad that you mentioned that. And that's something else at PwC we've seen. We have a number of what we call inclusion networks. So they're sort of like employee resource groups. And we've seen, once again, something that already existed pre-pandemic being utilized in new and even more impactful types of ways. So we have a parent inclusion network, a women's inclusion network that's serving that purpose, Stephanie, just like you talked about, of just having community around you to commiserate, to share tips, to check on each other. So it's so important. So I know that we are trying to leave some time for at least a couple of questions. So I will turn it over for Q&A.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kimberly. What an awesome conversation. Thank you. Something that was shared just at the beginning, Kimberly, was you had mentioned that we don't even know how this is impacting us. And I think that's something that we need to really hold true. And this is, things will open up and things will start to change, but we really need to reflect on what people need throughout the transition, even back to work. So thank you for all of your insights and your thoughts and some great ideas. I know I also love glass and rubber balls. I've heard bowling balls, but glass balls is awesome. So really great ideas. And I hope that many of you in this group that are joining us today will take back some of these great ideas. Let's jump to Q&A. Before we get started on the live Q&A, we did have some folks that included Q&A in their registration. So really appreciate some of those great questions. And I'll start with the first one. The first one was, what accommodations or supports are being provided to help retain women in the workforce as the COVID situation continues?
So I can start by mentioning a couple of things that we're doing here at PwC, and really all of the things that I've discussed up to this point are helping us retain women. The increased flexibility, the 20% pay leave of absence, all those kinds of things. One other thing that we are doing is, even if we have women who do decide that the right choice for them and their families is to step away from the workforce, at least for a bit, we have what's called the Full Circle program, where for up to 5 years, we stay in contact with you. You can continue to have training alongside our PwC employees. You stay in touch with the folks that you worked with before. You stay in the know with news that's happening within PwC. And so in that way, we maintain a very special connection so that it's easier to come back. And I said that we haven't had huge numbers, relatively speaking, of women leaving. Fortunately, we have had some. And it is my hope and expectation that by participating in this Full Circle program and us staying close to them, that the moment things start to truly open up, we can all start to see that light at the end of this very long tunnel. I'm really hoping and praying for a quick recovery, and for some of the women who've left to take care of small children, for example, will be back.
Excellent.
Michelle, the one I would add, that so many of the things that we've described today were things that we all knew and were working through prior to the pandemic. The pandemic just sort of, exacerbated or made much more relevant some of the importance of the things that we were doing to support our women workforce. And so I think that's the primary takeaway, is post-pandemic, this doesn't just end. This is
Right.
This is just sort of the norm that we were all focused on, and it gave it heightened importance to us as women are starting to leave the workforce in larger numbers based on the current situation.
Absolutely. I think this conversation could probably go on for another hour. I know that I would be happy to continue to speak with you all for another hour, but we do need to wrap up. Even an interesting, question that just came in, and many others, about, what's going to happen after, how are these options going to play out afterwards? And so I think so much of that is the women that have been part of this conversation and leading the charge. So thank you for your insights. Thank you for your perspectives. Please take back these ideas, no matter if you're at a nonprofit or a startup or a Fortune 500 company or in academia. Please bring back these ideas and start looking at ways that you can too be diverse by design. Now I'd like to introduce Nia Darville. She is our first director of Diverse by Design, and a powerful woman herself. I will turn the floor over to you, Nia, to wrap us up.
Michelle. Thank you so much, Michelle. Wasn't today's session amazing? I learned so much from each of our participants, and I hope that you did too. Thank you, Stephanie, Kim, and Julie for sharing your thoughts and experiences with us today. Thank you, Toni, for giving us wonderful context for our conversation. And thank you, Michelle, for being such an amazing host. I also want to say thank you to our corporate sponsors, Google, Comcast, JPMC, and Tech Systems. Most importantly, I want to thank you, our attendees, for joining us today as we discussed how we can better support women during the pandemic and beyond. As Damian Howard, Diverse by Design's co-founder, always says, investing in diversity and inclusion isn't just a philanthropic principle. It simply makes good business sense. Significant research shows that diverse and inclusive workplaces tend to provide better staff engagement, higher productivity and less turnover, as well as increased innovation and profitability. At Diverse by Design, we want to empower organizations to move from conversation to action, and we want to meet with you to help your organization figure out how to do just that. We want to invite you to schedule a consultation with us to learn about how your organization can become diverse by design. Visit our website to set that up and learn more at diversebydesign.org. Finally, we wanted to let you know that we have a tangible way to thank you for coming to this event. We've designed limited edition, the 140K stickers, to help remind you of the valuable tools you've learned today. In order to secure one, make sure to fill out the survey in the follow-up link, the follow-up email you'll receive after this event, or you can copy and paste the link that will be added to the chat to get started on that now. Thank you again for joining us today. We hope that this webinar provided you with valuable tools and insights. Let's keep this conversation going. We have several more events coming up very, very soon. And so keep an eye on your email for the next opportunity to join us. In the meantime, don't forget to schedule a time to talk to us. We look forward to hearing from you very soon. Goodbye, everyone.